Max's howl pierced through the marble lobby of Peachtree Tower like a siren cutting through Atlanta's morning traffic. Sarah Collins tightened her grip on his leash, but her 6-year-old Belgian Malinois partner refused to move away from the gleaming elevator doors. "Easy, boy," she whispered, crouching beside him. Max's ears were pinned back, his dark eyes fixed on the brass elevator panel displaying "out of order" in bold red letters. His howl rose again, haunting and insistent. Building manager Richard Vaughan approached with hurried steps, his expensive suit wrinkled from what Sarah guessed had been a sleepless night. "Officer Collins, I appreciate you responding so quickly, but this is just a mechanical issue. The elevator broke down yesterday afternoon." Sarah stood, studying the pristine lobby around them. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished marble floors, and the scent of fresh flowers from elaborate arrangements couldn't mask something else, something that made Max's nostrils flare with each breath. "Sir, when did the dog barking start?" she asked, watching Max circle the elevator area, his tactical harness gleaming under the lobby lights. "Around 6 this morning. Mrs. Henderson in 4B called it in, said it was disturbing her morning yoga session." Vaughan's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been dealing with complaints all morning. Max sat directly in front of the elevator, tilted his head back, and released another mournful howl. Sarah had worked with him for 6 years, through drug busts in downtown Atlanta, missing person searches in Piedmont Park, and explosive detection sweeps at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. She'd learned to read his body language like a favorite book, and everything about his posture screamed wrong. "Has anyone else been acting strange around the building?" Sarah asked, pulling out her notepad. "Just the dog," Vaughan replied quickly. "Look, Officer Collins, I've got tenants complaining, reporters showing up. This is a prestigious address. Can't you just take the dog somewhere else?" Sarah watched Max's reaction as a maintenance worker emerged from the stairwell, tools jingling. Max's ears perked forward and he whined softly, not the aggressive alert he'd shown at the elevator, but recognition. The worker, a thin man with grease-stained overalls, avoided eye contact as he crossed the lobby. "Max worked a case last month where a domestic terrorist tried to blow up a MARTA station," Sarah said, keeping her voice conversational. "Saved 47 lives when he detected C4 hidden in a maintenance panel." She knelt beside Max again, running her fingers through his thick coat. "He's never wrong." Max leaned into her touch, but kept his gaze locked on the elevator. His breathing was steady, controlled, not the panting of stress, but the focused intensity he showed when tracking a scent. "The elevator company sent someone yesterday," Vaughan offered. "Said it was a mechanical failure. Parts won't be available until next week." "I'd like to speak with that technician," Sarah said, standing. "And I'll need a list of everyone who accessed this elevator in the past 48 hours. Vaughan's face flushed. That's not really necessary, is it? I mean, it's just a broken elevator." Max's howl filled the lobby again, and Sarah felt that familiar tingle between her shoulder blades, the same sensation she'd experienced before discovering the human trafficking ring operating out of a seemingly innocent food truck, or when Max had led her to the kidnapped banker's daughter hidden in a suburban basement. "Mr. Vaughan," she said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that had closed dozens of cases, "in my experience, dogs don't howl at broken elevators. They howl at death." She gestured toward Max, who was now pawing at the base of the elevator door. "And Max has found more bodies than most detectives in this city." The building manager's face went pale. "Bodies? Officer Collins, I can assure you there are no bodies in this building." Sarah pulled out her phone, speed dialing her sergeant. "Sergeant Rodriguez, it's Collins. I need a full forensics team at Peachtree Tower." "And sir?" She looked at Max, who had stopped howling and was now sitting at perfect attention, his dark eyes alert and waiting. "Bring the heavy equipment. Max thinks we're going to need it." As she ended the call, Sarah knelt beside her partner once more. "Good boy," she whispered. "Now show me what you found." Max's tail wagged once, a single, controlled wag that told her everything she needed to know. They had work to do. The forensics team's UV lights turned the elevator shaft into a crime scene Christmas tree. Sarah crouched beside Max at the edge of the shaft, watching purple and blue traces glow against the concrete walls like neon graffiti. "Chemical residue," Detective Mike Chen announced, his voice echoing up from 20 feet below. "Looks like RDX traces, but minimal. Just enough to damage the cables without bringing down the building." Max's ears twitched at the sound of Chen's voice, but his attention remained fixed on a specific section of the shaft wall. Sarah followed his gaze to where the forensics photographer was documenting blast patterns, small, precise damage that spoke of surgical precision rather than random destruction. "This wasn't an accident," Sarah called down to Chen. "Someone wanted this elevator out of commission without making it look like sabotage." Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at her shoulder, his weathered face skeptical. "Collins, you're telling me someone blew up an elevator to, what, inconvenience rich people?" Before Sarah could respond, Max moved. He pressed his nose against the concrete wall beside the shaft, his breathing shifting to the short, controlled sniffs that meant he'd found something significant. Sarah had seen him make this exact motion when he'd located the hidden compartment containing $2 million in drug money behind a false wall in East Atlanta. "Max, show me," she whispered. The Malinois moved 3 feet to the right, sat, and looked back at her with the steady gaze that had become their silent communication over 6 years of partnership. Sarah ran her hands along the wall where Max had indicated, feeling for irregularities in the smooth concrete. "There," she said, her fingers finding a hairline crack that formed a perfect rectangle. "Chen, I need you up here with the ground-penetrating radar." "Rodriguez, with all due respect," Building Manager Vaughn interrupted, appearing behind them with 2 men in expensive suits. "This investigation is disrupting business operations. My legal team suggests—" "Your legal team can take it up with the mayor's office," Rodriguez cut him off. "This is now officially a federal investigation. Explosives in a commercial building puts this under terrorism protocols." Sarah watched the color drain from Vaughn's face. More interesting was the reaction of the 2 suits. One checked his watch, while the other pulled out his phone. Neither looked surprised by the word explosives. Max whined softly, his signal that he wanted to investigate further. Sarah unclipped his leash, knowing he'd stay within her sight range. He moved past the elevator shaft toward the emergency stairwell, his nose working systematically along the baseboard. "Collins!" Chen's voice carried a new urgency. "You need to see this." Sarah peered into the shaft where Chen was using a fiber optic camera to examine the hidden compartment Max had found. On the camera's screen, she could see the outline of what looked like a small electronic device. "Timer mechanism," Chen said. "Sophisticated stuff, military-grade components." He looked up at her. Whoever did this had serious training. Max barked once from the stairwell, his alert signal for human scent. Sarah joined him at the base of the stairs, where he was focused on a section of the wall that showed traces of recent disturbance. The concrete dust was minimal, but Max's nose caught what human eyes missed. "Someone's been through here recently," Sarah observed, noting scuff marks on the wall that suggested heavy objects had been moved through the narrow space. "Officer Collins," one of the suits approached, extending a business card. "I'm David Morrison, representing several tenants in this building. We're concerned about the scope of this investigation." Sarah examined the card. "Morrison, Keller and Associates, Corporate Security. What kind of business do your clients conduct here, Mr. Morrison?" "Consulting, financial advisory services, nothing that would warrant this level of scrutiny." Max returned to her side, his body language shifting to the protective stance he took whenever he sensed deception. Sarah had learned to trust that instinct completely after the incident with the corrupt city councilman who'd tried to convince her that the missing evidence was just a filing error. "Mr. Morrison," she said, pocketing the card, "I'll need a complete list of your clients, their business activities, and access logs for the past month." Morrison's smile never wavered, but Sarah caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "I'm afraid client confidentiality won't apply when we get the federal warrant," Rodriguez interrupted, "which should be here within the hour." As Morrison and his colleague exchanged glances, Sarah knelt beside Max, running her hand along his shoulder. His muscles were coiled tight, the way they got when he sensed danger that wasn't immediately visible. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. Max looked toward the elevator shaft, then back at her, his dark eyes holding the same intensity she'd seen when he'd warned her about the sniper positioned on the courthouse roof during the mayor's speech. Sarah stood, her hand instinctively moving to her service weapon. "Rodriguez, I think we need to expand this investigation. Whatever Max found in that wall, it's just the beginning." The sergeant nodded grimly. "Chen, I want every inch of this building swept. And Collins," he looked at Max, who was now sitting at perfect attention, his gaze fixed on the emergency exit. "Follow your partner's lead. He's been right more times than I can count." As Sarah prepared to follow Max toward the stairwell, she caught Morrison pulling out his phone again. This time, she was close enough to hear him whisper, "We have a problem." The emergency stairwell echoed with the sound of Sarah's boots as she and Max climbed toward the 15th floor. Each landing, Max paused, his nose working the air currents that flowed down from the upper levels. At the 12th floor, he stopped entirely. "What have you got?" Sarah asked, watching Max's ears rotate forward like radar dishes. The Malinois pressed his nose against the stairwell door marked Floor 12, Authorized Personnel Only. His breathing shifted to the rapid, shallow pattern that indicated fresh human scent, lots of it. Sarah tried the handle. Locked. She pulled out her radio. "Rodriguez, I need building security to unlock stairwell access to Floor 12. Collins, Vaughn says floors 12 through 15 are private offices. No public access. Since when do private offices need authorized personnel only signs in emergency stairwells?" Max whined softly, his signal for urgency. Sarah had learned to read the subtle differences in his vocalizations. This wasn't his alert for explosives or drugs. This was his people scent, the one that had led them to the kidnapped judge's daughter, hidden in a warehouse basement. Footsteps echoed from above. Sarah looked up to see Morrison and another man in an expensive suit descending quickly. They stopped when they spotted her. "Officer Collins," Morrison called out, slightly out of breath, "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. These upper floors are private consulting offices. Client confidentiality requires—" "Mr. Morrison, this is a federal investigation involving explosives," Sarah interrupted. "Client confidentiality doesn't override public safety." The second man stepped forward, extending his hand. "James Keller, senior partner. Officer, we're happy to cooperate, but we need to ensure our client's sensitive financial information remains protected." Max's body language shifted. He moved slightly in front of Sarah, his stance widening, the protective position he'd taken when the drug dealer had pulled a knife in the Candler Park bust. "How many people work on these floors?" Sarah asked, noting how both men had positioned themselves to block the stairwell. "Minimal staff," Keller replied quickly. "Most of our consultants work remotely. Very quiet operations." Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Rodriguez. "City records show floors 12-15 have electrical usage consistent with 200+ people daily. Building permits show office space for 15 maximum." She looked at Max, who was now focused on the door handle, his nose working overtime. "Max, back up," she commanded. The Malinois moved behind her, but his attention remained locked on the door. Sarah had seen him make this exact focus when they'd discovered the human trafficking operation disguised as a modeling agency. "Gentlemen, I'm going to need access to all floors of this building," Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority that had closed 47 cases in 6 years. "Now." Morrison and Keller exchanged glances. "We'll need to contact our clients first," Morrison said. "Give them time to secure sensitive documents." "How long?" Sarah asked. 24 hours should be sufficient," Max barked once, his alert for deception. Sarah had learned to trust that signal completely after the corrupt bank manager had tried to convince her that the missing loan documents were just misfiled. "I'll give you 1 hour," Sarah said. "Then I'm coming back with a federal warrant and bolt cutters." As Morrison and Keller headed back up the stairs, Sarah caught fragments of their whispered conversation. "Move the files. Call Henderson. A bigger problem than we thought." Max moved to the door again, his whine more insistent now. Sarah knelt beside him, studying his body language. His tail was rigid, ears forward, muscles coiled. The same posture he'd shown when they'd found the mayor's chief of staff's secret office, where the bribery records were hidden. "You smell something specific, don't you?" she whispered. Max looked at her, then back at the door, his dark eyes holding that intelligence that never failed to amaze her. He'd been right about the courthouse bomber, right about the kidnapped banker's daughter, right about the drug money hidden in the church basement. Sarah's radio crackled. "Collins, this is Rodriguez. Building management is pushing back hard on the warrant. They've got 3 different law firms calling the captain. Serge, Max is telling me there's something major behind this door. When has he ever been wrong?" A pause. "Never. But Collins, the pressure from upstairs is intense. I need concrete evidence, not dog instincts." Sarah looked at Max, who was now sitting in perfect attention, his gaze fixed on her face. She'd learned to read that look. It was the same expression he'd worn before leading her to the explosive device hidden in the subway tunnel. "Rodriguez, I'm going to need that warrant expedited, and I want surveillance on Morrison and Keller. Max thinks we're about to uncover something that goes way beyond a broken elevator." "How sure are you, Collins?" Sarah ran her hand along Max's shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Sure enough to bet my career on it." As she and Max headed back down the stairwell, she caught the sound of multiple vehicles starting in the building's parking garage. Through the stairwell window, she watched 3 black sedans pull out in formation, their windows tinted dark enough to hide their occupants. Max's low growl told her everything she needed to know. They were running out of time. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the building's original blueprints against the steering wheel of her patrol car. Max sat in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed on the Peachtree Tower entrance, tracking every person who entered or exited. "This doesn't match what we saw," Sarah muttered, comparing the architectural plans to her photos from the stairwell. "According to this, there's no authorized personnel restriction on floor 12. Her phone rang. Detective Chen's voice carried excitement. "Collins, you need to hear this. The elevator technician who supposedly fixed the system yesterday? He doesn't exist." Sarah straightened. "What do you mean?" "I called the elevator company. They have no record of sending anyone to Peachtree Tower. The work order was placed using a stolen company ID." Max's ears perked at the sound of Chen's voice through the speaker. He'd worked with Chen on the airport bomb threat last year, and his body language showed recognition and alertness. "So someone impersonated a technician to gain access," Sarah said. "But why sabotage the elevator if they could just walk in?" "That's the thing, Collins. I reviewed the building's security footage from yesterday. The fake technician didn't just work on the elevator. He spent 3 hours on floor 15, and he wasn't alone." Sarah felt the familiar tingle between her shoulder blades. "How many people?" 7 men, all carrying briefcases. They used the elevator exclusively. No stairs, no other floors. Like they were moving something heavy. Max whined softly, his attention shifting to the building's parking garage entrance. Sarah followed his gaze and spotted a familiar figure, the maintenance worker from this morning, the one who'd avoided eye contact. "Chen, I'm looking at someone who might be connected. Can you run plates on a white utility van? License..." She squinted at the distant vehicle. "Charlie Delta 7492. Give me 5 minutes." Sarah watched the maintenance worker load equipment into the van with urgent, jerky movements. Max's body language shifted to high alert, ears forward, muscles coiled, the stance he took when tracking armed suspects. "Easy, boy," Sarah whispered. "Let's see what he does." The van pulled out of the garage, and Sarah followed at a distance. Max kept his nose pressed to the slightly open window, his breathing pattern indicating he was picking up a scent trail. Her phone buzzed with a text from Chen. Van registered to Anthony Briggs, 47, explosives expert, dishonorably discharged from Army Corps of Engineers, 2 priors for demolition without permits. Sarah's pulse quickened. "Max, we've got our bomber." The van turned onto a side street behind the tower, stopping at what appeared to be a maintenance entrance Sarah hadn't noticed before. Briggs got out, looked around nervously, then began unloading what looked like the same equipment she'd seen him carry in the lobby. Max's low growl indicated danger. Sarah had learned to trust that warning completely after the incident where Max had alerted her to the sniper seconds before he fired. She parked behind a delivery truck and observed Briggs approach a heavy metal door marked Utility Access, No Public Entry. He didn't need keys. The door opened immediately, as if someone had been waiting for him. "Chen, you still there?" she whispered into her phone. "Yeah. What have you got?" Briggs just entered the tower through a rear entrance that's not on any of the building plans. Someone was waiting for him. Sarah watched through her binoculars as Briggs disappeared into the building. Max was practically vibrating with tension, his focus laser-sharp on the utility door. "Collins, I've got more intel on those briefcases." Chen's voice carried new urgency. "Building security cameras show they were heavy enough to require 2 men each. And they went up in that elevator multiple times over the past month. Monthly deliveries? Weekly. Every Thursday at exactly 3 p.m., when most office workers are in meetings." Sarah felt the pieces clicking together. "Tishen, what if the elevator wasn't broken to stop it working? What if it was broken to stop us from seeing where it goes?" Max barked once, his signal for an important realization. Sarah had heard that bark when he'd figured out that the kidnapped senator's son was being held in the building next door to where they'd been searching. "The elevator shaft," Sarah said suddenly. "Max led us to that hidden compartment, but what if it's not just hiding evidence? What if it's hiding an entrance?" Her radio crackled with Rodriguez's voice. "Collins, where are you? We just got the federal warrant for floors 12 through 15. Surge, I'm behind the building with Max. We found our bomber, and I think the elevator sabotage was designed to hide something bigger." "How much bigger?" Sarah watched the utility door, noting how seamlessly it blended into the building's exterior. Unless you knew exactly where to look, you'd walk right past it. "Big enough that they needed to shut down the only elevator that could access it," she replied. "Rodriguez, I think we're looking at a transportation system, something that moves people and materials without using the main building." Max turned to look at her, his dark eyes holding that intensity that meant he'd put together pieces of the puzzle before she had. She'd seen that look when he'd realized the museum theft was actually cover for corporate espionage. "Max knows something," Sarah said into the radio, "and based on his track record, we're about to discover that this broken elevator is just the beginning." The utility door opened again, and Briggs emerged, no longer carrying equipment. He looked directly at Sarah's position, smiled, and waved before getting into his van. Sarah's blood ran cold. "Rodriguez, they know we're here." Sarah's hands shook as she drove away from Peachtree Tower, Max's steady breathing the only sound breaking the silence in her patrol car. The way Briggs had waved at her replayed in her mind, too casual, too confident, like a man who knew he held all the cards. "We need backup, boy," she whispered to Max, who was watching the road behind them through the rear window. "But first, we need to figure out who we can trust." Max turned to face her, his dark eyes holding that steady intelligence that had saved her life more times than she could count. She'd learned to read every subtle shift in his expression during their 6 years together, and right now he was telling her to slow down and think. Sarah pulled into the parking lot of their old training facility in East Atlanta, the place where she'd first met Max when he was barely 2 years old. The abandoned warehouse had been converted into a K-9 training center before budget cuts closed it down, but Sarah still came here when she needed to clear her head. "Remember this place?" she asked, opening Max's door. Max jumped out and immediately began his methodical patrol of the perimeter, the same routine he'd learned as a puppy. Sarah watched him work, remembering the day her previous partner, Detective Frank Morris, had introduced them. "Collins, meet your new partner," Frank had said, barely able to contain his excitement. "This dog's got something special. Watch this." Frank had hidden a training explosive device somewhere in the warehouse while Sarah distracted Max with basic commands. When they'd returned, Max had found the device in under 30 seconds, hidden inside a ventilation duct that 3 human officers had missed. "How did he know to look there?" Sarah had asked. "He didn't know," Frank had replied. "He trusted his nose even when his eyes told him nothing was there." That lesson had saved Sarah's life 8 months later during the courthouse bombing case. Max had alerted to explosives in a briefcase that appeared completely normal to everyone else. When the bomb squad opened it, they'd found enough C4 to level half the building. "You taught me to trust what I can't see," Sarah said now, watching Max investigate the same ventilation duct where he'd found that first training device. Max barked once, his acknowledgement bark, and continued his patrol. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos from the past 2 days, studying each image with fresh eyes. The elevator shaft, the hidden compartment, the utility entrance behind the building, Briggs's confident wave, Morrison and Keller's nervous glances, the electrical usage records that didn't match the permitted occupancy. Her phone rang. Detective Chen's name appeared on the screen. "Collins? We've got a problem. Someone called in a bomb threat at the federal courthouse. Every available unit is being pulled off the Peachtree Tower investigation." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "That's convenient timing. Gets worse. The threat specifically mentioned your name and Max's. Said if the K9 unit responds to the courthouse, the real bomb will go off." Max returned to her side, his body language shifting to protective mode. He'd sensed the change in her voice, the way he always did when danger was approaching. "Chen, they're trying to isolate us," Sarah said. "Get us away from the tower so they can move whatever they're hiding. Captain's orders are to take you and Max to a safe house until we can assess the threat level." Sarah looked at Max, who was sitting at perfect attention, his gaze fixed on her face. She remembered another case, 2 years ago, when corrupt city officials had tried to discredit Max's findings about drug money hidden in public works contracts. They'd claimed the dog was unreliable, that his alerts were false positives. Sarah had trusted Max anyway. The subsequent investigation had exposed a corruption ring that reached into the mayor's office and resulted in 14 arrests. "Chen, how many times has Max been wrong about a threat?" she asked. "In 6 years. Never. But Collins, and how many times have people tried to discredit his findings when they were afraid of what he might uncover?" A pause. 7 times, and every time Max was right and they were covering something up. Max whined softly, his head tilted in the questioning expression he made when he was trying to communicate something important. Sarah knelt beside him, studying his face. "What is it, boy? What are you trying to tell me?" Max looked toward the warehouse entrance, then back at her, his tail wagging slightly. Sarah followed his gaze and realized what he was showing her. The same training scenario they'd run hundreds of times, where Max had to choose between following orders to evacuate and trusting his nose to find the real threat. "You're right," she whispered. "Sometimes the biggest danger isn't where they tell you to look." Sarah stood, her decision made. "Chen, I'm not going to any safe house. Max found something at that tower, and someone's working very hard to keep us away from it." "Collins, you're talking about disobeying direct orders. I'm talking about trusting my partner." She looked at Max, who was now standing beside her patrol car, ready to go back to work. "In 6 years, he's never steered me wrong. I'm not going to start doubting him now." As Sarah drove back toward downtown Atlanta, Max settled into his working position in the passenger seat, his eyes alert and focused ahead. Whatever was waiting for them at Peachtree Tower, they'd face it together. "Just like always, partner," Sarah said softly. "Trust the nose, follow the truth." Max's single bark told her he understood. They had work to finish. Sarah's apartment door stood ajar when she and Max arrived home that evening. The hair on the back of her neck rose as Max's body language shifted instantly to high alert. Ears forward, muscles coiled, the stance he took when detecting immediate danger. "Stay," she whispered, drawing her service weapon. Max remained frozen beside her, but his low growl indicated multiple human scents inside her home. Sarah had lived in the same Midtown apartment for 4 years, and Max knew every scent that belonged and everyone that didn't. The living room looked untouched, but Max's nose led them toward the kitchen. On her counter sat a single manila envelope with her name written in block letters. No postmark, no return address. Sarah photographed the envelope before opening it. Inside, she found photos of herself and Max at various locations around Atlanta. Outside the courthouse, at their training facility, even at the veterinary clinic where Max received his annual checkups. The message was typed on plain white paper. "Officer Collins, your investigation into Peachtree Tower is based on a misunderstanding. For your safety and that of your partner, we suggest you accept the transfer to the Airport Security Division that will be offered tomorrow morning. Some mysteries are better left unsolved." Max whined softly, his nose working the air around the envelope. His body language indicated he'd detected the same scent from the tower. The maintenance worker, Briggs. Sarah's phone buzzed. An unknown number had sent a text. "Check your backyard." Through her kitchen window, Sarah saw Max's outdoor water bowl had been moved to the center of her small patio. Beside it sat a small device she didn't recognize. "That's a GPS tracker," she said aloud, Max's ears perking at the tension in her voice. "They've been watching us." Her phone rang. Detective Chen's voice carried urgency. "Collins, where are you? There's been a development." "Someone broke into my apartment," Sarah said, still staring at the photos spread across her counter. "They're trying to intimidate us into backing off." "It's worse than that. I ran deeper background checks on Morrison and Keller. Their consulting firm doesn't exist in any legitimate business database, but their financial records show monthly wire transfers totaling over $10 million. Sarah felt Max lean against her leg, his solid presence grounding her as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. 10 million from where? That's where it gets interesting. The transfers come from a shell company owned by Atlanta City Council member Patricia Henderson. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Henderson had been instrumental in getting funding for the K-9 unit expansion. She'd personally commended Sarah and Max after they'd stopped the courthouse bomber. Chen. Henderson was at the mayor's safety briefing last month. She knows our protocols, our case histories, everything about how Max and I work. Max's growl deepened, and Sarah followed his gaze to the window. A black sedan had parked across the street, its occupants clearly watching her apartment. "They're here," Sarah whispered into the phone. "Collins, get out of there, now!" Sarah grabbed Max's tactical vest from the closet, her hands moving with the speed of 6 years' practice. Max stood perfectly still as she secured the vest, his training overriding any anxiety about the watchers outside. "Good boy," she murmured. "We've been in worse spots than this." Her back door opened onto an alley that connected to 3 different streets. Sarah had mapped every exit route when she'd first moved in, a habit from her training days that was about to pay off. Max led the way through the alley, his nose checking for additional threats. At the intersection with Oak Street, he stopped and looked back at her, his signal that the path ahead was clear, but she needed to make a decision. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. "The offer expires at 8 a.m. tomorrow. After that, we cannot guarantee your safety or Max's." The threat against Max sent white-hot anger through Sarah's chest. She'd received threats before, but no one had ever been bold enough to threaten her partner directly. "Max," she said softly, "remember the warehouse shooting last year? When that dealer tried to use me as leverage against you?" Max's tail wagged once. He remembered. He'd ignored Sarah's command to stay back and had taken down the armed suspect before he could fire. That decision had saved both their lives. "Sometimes the best way to protect each other is to finish the job," Sarah continued. Her phone rang. Rodriguez's voice was grim. Collins, I just got word that you're being transferred to airport security effective immediately. Orders came from the top. Surge. They're trying to remove me from the investigation because Max found something they can't afford to have discovered. Collins, the pressure is enormous. City Council, Mayor's Office, federal agencies, everyone wants this to go away quietly. Sarah looked at Max, who was sitting at perfect attention despite the chaos around them. His dark eyes held the same determination she'd seen when he'd refused to give up searching for the kidnapped banker's daughter, even after the FBI had called off the search. Rodriguez, in 6 years, has Max ever led us to anything that wasn't worth pursuing? A long pause. Never. But Collins, this is bigger than just following a lead. This could end both your careers. Sarah knelt beside Max, running her hand along his neck where his K9 badge was attached to his vest. Some things are more important than careers. What do you need? 12 hours, Sarah said. Give me 12 hours to follow Max's nose wherever it leads. If we don't find something concrete by then, I'll take the transfer. Nah. As Sarah and Max made their way through Atlanta's back streets toward downtown, she noticed the black sedan following at a distance. Max had detected their presence before she had, his periodic glances backward confirming they were being tracked. They want to know what we're planning, Sarah said. Let's show them. Max's responding bark carried a note of anticipation she recognized. They were done running. Sarah's lockpicking skills, learned during her tactical training, made quick work of the utility entrance behind Peachtree Tower. Max pressed close beside her as they slipped into a service corridor that wasn't on any building plan she'd seen. The narrow hallway stretched into darkness, lit only by emergency lighting that cast eerie shadows on concrete walls. Max's nose worked systematically, his breathing pattern indicating multiple fresh human scents layered over each other like invisible fingerprints. "This way," Sarah whispered, following Max as he turned toward what appeared to be a service elevator hidden behind an unmarked steel door. The elevator was smaller than the main passenger lifts, designed for freight rather than people. But the control panel showed something that made Sarah's blood run cold. 15 floors, just like the main building, plus 3 additional levels marked B1, B2, and B3. Basement levels that don't exist on the city blueprints, Sarah murmured. Max whined softly and pressed the button for the 15th floor with his nose, a trick Sarah had taught him for accessing areas during searches. The elevator rose silently, its mechanism far newer and smoother than the broken passenger elevator. The doors opened onto a scene that shattered every assumption Sarah had made about the case. The entire 15th floor was an open operations center filled with computer workstations, digital displays showing financial data streams, and dozens of people working with the focused intensity of a military command center. Charts covered the walls, showing voting districts, election timelines, and financial flow diagrams that connected city contracts to offshore accounts. Max's body language shifted to extreme alert. His nose was detecting something beyond the human activity. Sarah had learned to read the difference between his people-sent alerts and his chemical detection signals. "Money," she breathed, recognizing Max's reaction from their drug money seizures. Massive amounts of cash. A woman in an expensive suit noticed them first. She spoke quietly into a headset, and within seconds, security personnel were moving toward the elevator. But Max had already identified the strongest scent trail, leading Sarah toward a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Atlanta. Through the glass, Sarah saw City Council member Patricia Henderson sitting at a polished table with Morrison, Keller, and 3 men she didn't recognize. Charts and documents covered the table, but what caught her attention were the stacks of banded cash arranged like building blocks along the walls. Henderson looked up and made direct eye contact with Sarah through the glass. Instead of surprise or alarm, her face showed resignation, as if she'd been expecting this moment. Sarah's radio crackled with an encrypted frequency she didn't recognize. Henderson's voice came through clearly. "Officer Collins, please join us. We need to talk." Max's growl indicated danger. But his posture suggested the threat wasn't immediate. Sarah had learned to trust these subtle distinctions during hostage situations where Max could differentiate between armed suspects and terrified civilians. Security personnel flanked the conference room entrance, but they made no move to stop Sarah and Max from entering. Henderson gestured to an empty chair across from her. 6 years ago, we thought the K9 unit was a perfect cover, Henderson began without preamble. Dogs find drugs, explosives, missing persons, simple, predictable work that keeps the public happy and doesn't threaten real operations. Sarah remained standing, her hand near her weapon. Max positioned himself where he could watch both the security team and the conference room occupants. We didn't anticipate Max, Henderson continued. Most police dogs have specific training limitations. They find what they're taught to find, but Max finds what doesn't belong. Morrison opened a thick folder. His success rate is unprecedented. 47 cases closed, 0 false positives, multiple commendations for detecting threats, other methods missed. What we have here, Henderson said, gesturing to the operations center beyond the glass, is a carefully constructed system for redirecting public funds through legitimate municipal contracts into accounts that support candidates who understand the complexity of modern governance. Sarah felt the pieces falling into place. You're buying elections. We're ensuring competent leadership, Keller corrected. Atlanta's growth requires coordination between public and private interests. Sometimes democracy needs guidance. Max's attention shifted to a section of the wall where Sarah now noticed seams indicating a hidden door. His nose was telling him something was behind that wall, something more significant than money. The elevator sabotage was meant to buy us time to relocate operations, Henderson said. We underestimated how quickly Max would identify the real infrastructure. Sarah followed Max's gaze to the hidden door. What's behind that wall? Henderson's composure cracked slightly. Officer Collins, there are aspects of city governance that require... Max barked once sharply, his alert for human distress. Sarah had heard that exact bark when they'd found the kidnapped senator's daughter. There are people behind that wall, Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of 6 years' experience reading Max's signals. People who don't want to be here. The security team tensed, hands moving toward concealed weapons. But Max's body language had shifted again. He was no longer focused on the money or the operations center. He was focused on saving lives. Henderson, open that door, Sarah commanded, drawing her service weapon. Now. Henderson looked at Morrison and Keller, some silent communication passing between them. Officer Collins, you've stumbled into something much larger than a municipal corruption case. Max's insistent whining indicated urgency, people in immediate danger. Open the door, Sarah repeated, or I'll let Max open it for you. As Henderson reluctantly moved toward the hidden wall panel, Sarah realized the broken elevator had never been about hiding money laundering. It had been about hiding something much worse. The hidden door slid open to reveal a nightmare that made Sarah's stomach lurch. 6 people sat zip-tied to chairs in a windowless room, 3 women and 3 men, all showing signs of prolonged captivity. Max immediately moved toward them, his nose working to assess their physical condition. Jesus, Sarah breathed, recognizing one of the faces. That's Marcus Webb, the city auditor who went missing 3 months ago. Henderson's voice remained calm, clinical. Mr. Webb discovered irregularities in municipal contracts that threatened to expose our oversight operations. We needed time to implement corrective measures. Sarah's radio crackled with a familiar voice that made her blood freeze. Collins, this is Rodriguez. Stand down immediately and step away from the civilians. Her sergeant emerged from another hidden door, flanked by 4 officers Sarah recognized from her own precinct. Rodriguez's service weapon was drawn, pointed directly at Max. Surge! Sarah's voice cracked with disbelief. I'm sorry, Collins. This operation is bigger than one case, bigger than one city. These people were interfering with a federal investigation into domestic terrorism financing. Max's growl deepened as he positioned himself between Sarah and Rodriguez. The Malinois had worked with Rodriguez dozens of times, but his instincts were overriding recognition. A trained response Sarah had seen when Max detected threats from unexpected sources. "Rodriguez, these are kidnapped civilians," Sarah said, her weapon still trained on Henderson. "Whatever they told you about terrorism financing is a lie. Collins, the operation you've stumbled into has prevented 3 major terrorist attacks in the southeast. The money flowing through this building funds intelligence operations that keep Atlanta safe." One of the captives, a woman Sarah didn't recognize, managed to speak through her restraints. "He's lying. They're selling city contracts to foreign companies, using the profits to influence federal elections." Rodriguez's face hardened. "Ma'am, you're a known associate of anti-government organizations. Your testimony isn't reliable." Sarah felt her world tilting. Rodriguez had been her mentor for 6 years, had personally recommended her for the K9 unit, had celebrated every case she and Max had closed. "How long?" she asked quietly. 2 years, Rodriguez replied. "Since the mayor's race." "Collins, you have to understand. The alternative was letting Atlanta fall under the control of people who don't understand the complexities of modern urban security." Max's attention shifted between Rodriguez and the captives, his training conflicting with his instincts. Sarah had taught him to trust police officers, but his nose was telling him these particular officers represented danger. Henderson opened a tablet and showed Sarah financial records. "Officer Collins, your K9 unit budget has increased 40% in the past 2 years. New equipment, expanded training facilities, increased personnel. That funding came from our operations. You think buying better equipment justifies kidnapping and election fraud? We think maintaining stability justifies difficult choices," Morrison interjected. "Your own success rate improved dramatically once we ensured you had proper resources." Sarah's mind raced through the past 2 years of cases. The courthouse bomber, they'd received unusually detailed intelligence about his background. The drug trafficking ring, anonymous tips had led them directly to the evidence. The kidnapped banker's daughter, someone had called in her exact location. "You've been feeding us information," she realized, "making sure we succeeded so we wouldn't look too closely at cases you didn't want solved." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Collins, Max is the most effective K9 officer in the state. We needed his reputation intact to provide cover for operations like this." Max whined softly, his signal that he wanted to approach the captives. Sarah had seen him make this same request when they'd found the trafficking victims in the warehouse basement. "These people need medical attention," Sarah said. "They'll receive appropriate care once the federal investigation concludes," Rodriguez replied. Sarah looked at the captives more closely. The city auditor, Marcus Webb, was staring at her with desperate intensity. His mouth moved silently, and Sarah realized he was trying to communicate something. Following his gaze, she noticed he was looking at a ventilation grate near the ceiling. Max had also noticed the grate. His ears were tracking some sound or scent coming from above. "There are more," Sarah said suddenly. "There are more people hidden in this building." Henderson's composure cracked completely. "Officer Collins, you need to understand that some operations require compartmentalization." Max barked sharply, his alert for immediate danger. Sarah spun toward the sound and saw Rodriguez adjusting his aim from Max toward the captives. "Rodriguez, what are you doing?" "Minimizing exposure," he said quietly. "These people have seen too much. The operation is more important than individual casualties." Sarah felt something die inside her chest as she realized her mentor, the man who'd taught her to trust her instincts, to follow the evidence wherever it led, was preparing to execute 6 innocent people. Max's body language shifted to attack mode, his training overriding years of conditioning to trust police officers. Sarah had never seen him prepare to attack a fellow officer, but his instincts were clear. Rodriguez had become a threat to the people they were sworn to protect. "Max, hold!" Sarah commanded, but her voice carried no conviction. Rodriguez looked at her with something that might have been regret. "Collins, you can walk away from this." Take the airport transfer, keep Max safe, continue doing good work within the system, but these people cannot leave this room alive. Sarah looked at Max, whose dark eyes held the same determination she'd seen when he'd refused to abandon the search for the kidnapped senator's daughter. "Some things are more important than the system," she said, echoing the lesson Rodriguez himself had taught her years ago. The standoff stretched between them, mentor and student, corruption and justice, the badge and the oath. Max made the choice for both of them, moving to shield the nearest captive with his body. Time slowed as Sarah watched Rodriguez's finger tighten on the trigger, his weapon aimed at Marcus Webb. Max's muscles coiled beneath his tactical vest, every instinct screaming to protect the innocent people who couldn't protect themselves. "Rodriguez, please," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "These are civilians. This isn't who we are." "This is exactly who we have to be," Rodriguez replied. "Collins, you think police work is about following rules and protecting individuals, but real police work is about protecting the system that keeps society stable." Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket, Detective Chen's ringtone. She ignored it, but the sound made Max's ears twitch. He was listening to something beyond the immediate confrontation, his attention divided between the threat in front of them and something happening elsewhere in the building. "Serge, you taught me that every case matters because every victim matters," Sarah said. "You said that the moment we start deciding which people deserve protection, we stop being police officers." "I taught you idealism," Rodriguez said bitterly. "Reality taught me pragmatism." Henderson moved toward a wall panel Sarah hadn't noticed before. "Sergeant, we need to conclude this quickly. Federal agents are responding to an anonymous tip about this location." Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time she recognized the pattern. Chen was sending their emergency signal, 3 quick calls followed by a longer ring. It meant backup was on the way, but it also meant she needed to keep everyone alive until they arrived. Max whined softly, his signal that he wanted permission to act. Sarah had seen him use this communication when they'd cornered the bank robber who'd taken hostages in the downtown branch. Max had been asking for permission to disarm the suspect without lethal force. "Rodriguez, remember the Hernandez case?" Sarah said, buying time. "The corrupt city contractor who was skimming money from school construction projects?" Rodriguez's aim wavered slightly. "Collins, don't. You spent 3 months building that case, worked nights, weekends, missed your daughter's birthday party, and when his lawyers offered you $50,000 to lose some evidence, you arrested them too." "That was different," Rodriguez said, but his voice lacked conviction. "How?" Sarah pressed. "How is this different from what Hernandez was doing?" Max shifted position slightly, moving closer to Rodriguez. "Not aggressive movement. Protective movement, the same positioning he'd used when talking down the veteran having a PTSD episode outside the VA hospital." Henderson opened the wall panel, revealing another hidden elevator. "Sergeant, extraction protocols are in effect. We need to relocate the witnesses and sanitize this location." Sarah realized Henderson was talking about murdering the captives and destroying evidence. Her radio crackled with static, then Chen's voice broke through. "Collins, FBI is 60 seconds out. Georgia Bureau of Investigation is securing the building perimeter." Rodriguez heard the transmission too. His shoulders sagged as the reality of the situation became clear. "Collins, you don't understand what you've done. This operation prevents more crime than it enables. By becoming criminals ourselves." Max barked once sharply, his alert for new arrivals. Sarah heard it too, the distinctive sound of tactical boots in the service elevator shaft. "Federal agents!" The voice echoed from multiple directions as FBI teams entered the operations center. Henderson drew a concealed weapon, pointing it at Sarah. "Officer Collins, you've destroyed years of careful work. Hundreds of thousands of people will suffer because you couldn't see beyond simple moral absolutes." Sarah felt the weight of 6 years' partnership with Max. 6 years of learning to trust his instincts, even when they contradicted everything else. Max was telling her, through every line of his body language, that Henderson was lying. "Ma'am, drop your weapon!" FBI voices shouted from the operations center. Rodriguez looked at Sarah with something that might have been pride, mixed with regret. "Collins, you always were too honest for this job." "No," Sarah said quietly. "I was exactly honest enough." Max moved then, not toward Henderson or Rodriguez, but toward the captives. He began systematically checking each person for injuries, his nose working to assess their medical needs. Even in the middle of a standoff, he was focused on the mission, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Sarah realized that Max had known, from the moment they'd entered the building, that this wasn't about money laundering or election fraud. It was about something simpler and more fundamental, the choice between right and wrong. FBI agents poured into the conference room, weapons drawn, shouting commands. In the chaos, Rodriguez slowly lowered his gun and placed it on the table. "Agent Morrison, FBI," the team leader announced. "Officer Collins, we received your partner's emergency signal." Sarah looked confused. "My partner's emergency signal?" "The GPS tracker in Max's vest," Morrison explained. "It's programmed to send distress signals when he detects multiple human scents in distress situations. He triggered it 20 minutes ago." Sarah looked at Max, who was still focused on the captives but allowed himself one quick glance in her direction. She'd never known about the automatic distress signal, but Max had somehow activated it when he'd sensed the kidnapped people. "He's been calling for backup this whole time," she realized. As FBI agents secured Henderson and Rodriguez, Sarah knelt beside Max and the captives. Marcus Webb was conscious but dehydrated, and the others showed signs of prolonged stress, but no immediate life-threatening injuries. "Officer Collins," Agent Morrison approached, "we'll need your full report on how you discovered this operation." Sarah looked at Max, who was now sitting at perfect attention beside Marcus Webb, his job complete, but his vigilance maintained. "Agent Morrison," she said, "I followed my partner's nose. Everything else was just connecting the dots he'd already found." Max's tail wagged once, his acknowledgement that they'd done good work together. But as Sarah watched Rodriguez being led away in handcuffs, she realized that some betrayals leave scars that never fully heal. The system she'd believed in had been corrupted by the very people she'd trusted to protect it. At least she still had one partner she could trust completely. 3 hours after the FBI raid, Sarah and Max stood in the basement levels of Peachtree Tower that hadn't existed on any city blueprint. What they found there would ensure no one involved in the conspiracy could escape justice. "Collins, you need to see this," Agent Morrison called from behind a steel door marked Archive Storage. Max had led them directly to this room, his nose tracking scent patterns that revealed years of regular human activity. Inside, floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of documents, contracts, financial records, photographs, and audio recordings that detailed every aspect of the corruption network. Max moved methodically between the shelves, his nose identifying areas where people had spent significant time accessing specific files. "It's a complete record," Morrison said, flipping through bank statements. "Every transaction, every bribe, every election they influenced, going back